It's funny that I did some philosophy in university, but it's rare that you encounter African philosophy. At least I did. But when you do, when you start to mingle, you bump into the first subject, and that is Ubuntu. You will say something about that later. And then, not many minutes later, you bump into Professor Mungwini. At least I did. And it's a pleasure to have you here. Flew all the way from Pretoria in South Africa. You are from Zimbabwe originally, but you are now here with us, and I appreciate that so much. And I appreciate you being here as well. I have to say, these are not the best places you can get today, because the panel is on that side. So feel free to move to the center or to my left-hand side later, maybe after the keynote. All right, the floor is yours, Professor. I'm super curious, and I need all my brain cells. Good luck.
I would want to thank the speaker for the introductions. Yes, my name is already appeared. You want it closer here? All this one. Okay, can you hear now? Yes, my name has already been mentioned, and I am pleading that the first minute or so I take does not count towards my presentation time. Oh, okay. Because I've been allocated 20 minutes, which I hope to be faithful to. Now, I wish to thank you all and to thank the organizers. I'm not going to mention all of you by name, for giving me this opportunity to stand before you and to share with you some of my ideas on the topic from the perspective of African philosophy. And it is also a great occasion to be part of this 11th edition of the Stephen Ellis annual event. And it is something that I really appreciate. And the organizers, I should thank you for identifying me and bringing me here to share my ideas with you. Lastly, and most important, I would want to thank Professor Kheriteha. I met her for the first time on the airport. I knew her through her work. Wells of Power is a book that I remember very well, perhaps because of the title and how it brought together religion and politics in Africa. And as a student, we used to make reference to that book quite a number of times. And I wish to thank you for taking a time to meet me at the airport and to make sure that I get to the hotel to rest in time. And as you all know, traveling is its own toll from one region to the other. But above all else, I think it was the reassuring experience that I got to be to get that reception from one of the senior scholars in this country and in the world. And perhaps most of us can learn one or two things about scholarship. Now, let me come to the title of my work. Now the time can begin, right? Yes. The title of my work is exactly as given, The Role of African Philosophy in Peace and Security Issues in the Context of Africa. Now, a disclaimer first. In putting together this work, I consulted a number of sources. But during this presentation, I won't be able to mention each one of them by name. But be assured that I truly acknowledge their contribution in the list of references and throughout the essay. Now, let me get to my introduction. I shall begin by saying something briefly about African philosophy as a practice. Now, academic philosophy, depending on the manner in which it has been approached or practiced, can be too dry, too abstract, and sometimes disengaging and disempowering. I will not take you down that sterile route because I've learned to appreciate another way of doing philosophy, a mode of doing philosophy where our knowledge practice must be brought into the service of humanity. And of course, to engage on the basis of ethical responsibility. Now, the story of African philosophy, just like the history that informs it, is an ongoing quest. It is an unfinished project, and it is a text without an end and without a preordained conclusion. Now, as a tradition of thought, it constructs itself out of the living resources provided by culture. And through an with real issues of life and existence, informed, of course, by the history and memory as the resources that nourish thinking. So real problems of society must feed the reflective meditations of the philosopher. This means for me, philosophy must pay attention to the very places within which questions of ethics and politics arise. It cannot afford to be a fugitive from history, nor a silent witness to crimes against humanity. Now, even as it aims to reach for the universal, African philosophy remains by its very nature a product of human reflection, and therefore a context-oriented practice. The articulation of ideas rooted in the history of their provenance can be the basis of global philosophical contributions. That's what I believe about African philosophy. Now, 3 preliminary points. Africa is to theorize about the global South. It is to create a platform for what I call transformative engagements. And then point number 2, in the words of a fellow African, Elisio Makamu, we study Africa to understand the world. Africa is not what it is because of what it is like. Africa is what it is because of what the world is like, and vice versa. And the third preliminary point is, my reflections today are informed by what I have read about the person and scholar we are gathered here to honor. That is the spirit of dedication to research and honest intellectual engagement. Narratives, gratuitous assumptions, and simplistic ideologies about Africa to encourage the need to be original in our insights and conclusions. His genuine effort to understand Africa within its own historical reality and unfolding dynamics must continue. Now, the human story can be a great one, but it is also filled with pain and tragedy. Considering what we are witnessing around the world today, our topic for this dialogue could not have come at a better time. Philosophy contribute to peace and conflict resolution in Africa. What is African philosophy's take on peace and security issues in the context of Africa? How can African cultural resources contribute to peace building and human security issues in Africa? I was provided with this set of questions to serve as the guiding light on my reflections, but in a manner that would not necessarily confine those reflections. It is a legitimate question to ask, what is the practice of African philosophy for, if it does not take upon itself the critical role of attending to what Soyinka calls patterns of inhuman conduct that continue to scar and traumatize individuals and nations in an ever-escalating magnitude of horrors on the continent and across the world. Now, in laying the ground for the dialogue, and without venturing too far into philosophy, I have narrowed my discussion of the relevance and role of African philosophy to conflict and peace in Africa to 5 points. The first point, this is the question that Africa continues to defer and to refuse to give considered attention, and yet it is a question that Africa has to answer for itself. It is a question whose validity seems impossible to refute each time you think about it. As the late Ghanaian philosopher Kwasi Wiredu argued, today it is almost impossible to reflect on the problems of Africa, including violent conflicts, without at the same time developing the suspicion that we may not yet have found the system of organizing our lives, a mode of social and political governance that is much suited to our history and cultural circumstances. In other words, we are yet to develop for ourselves a system of governance that resonates with the dominant values of our culture and the metaphysical basis of the constitution of our families and societies. An African contribution to the theory and practice of governance is yet to be articulated, and it remains elusive. Logical and ontological foundations dominate the framing and organization of our politics have consistently failed to reflect the complex cultural dimensions of our existence. And this has a significant impact on the ability to exist peacefully and to resolve conflicts in a manner that speaks to who we are as a people. So the fundamental point I'm making is that we have not found a way to build the new in a manner that respects the old in Africa. Now, Africa's traditions should remain a source of innovative reconstruction instead of being cast aside or discarded. Now, confronted by a system that brings so much tension and adversity, we need to relearn the value and meaning of dialogue, solidarity, and consensus, both conceptually and existentially. It is increasingly becoming apparent that first, with the toxic adversarial relations, we need the integrative ethos and belief in the collective responsibility of all for the welfare of the community. Conflict itself is a symptom, and to address it, we must pay closer attention to the systems and structures that guide our organization and society, including its politics and ethics. Now, elucidating these theories to our challenges is the role of philosophers and other disciplines in African studies. At this point, because I can see my colleagues here present, that Dr. Pius Masima and Professor Henkainen have just published their book entitled African Philosophy, Voices of Wisdom. Now, among other things, the book places emphasis on dialogue and cooperation between social groups and between countries, and the pursuit of consensus as the best way to promote peace and security in the long run within Africa. And I think those who will be interested can read the text. And it is available in Dutch. Hopefully, it will be available in English very soon. I've only read the introduction in English. Second point, I termed my second point, philosophy and the rational articulation of the wisdom traditions of Africa. Here, I focus on the contribution of African philosophy, meaning a dedicated reconstruction and rational articulation of the wisdom traditions of Africa, including its rituals, cultural and religious practices, the politics and institutions, legal institutions that sustain peace in society. It also entails studying the role and place of traditional sages in the modern context of our challenges. At no point in any community is any community without a cohort of well-known and respected sages who are renowned for their wisdom and sagacious reasoning. Today, these are being sidelined in matters of conflict and dispute resolution, with their role being usurped by politically connected individuals and influential scholars or individuals in society who lack the knowledge and authority of tradition. Without them, the connection between people and their ancestral and spiritual resources is often invoked as a guarantors of peace or agreements is severed. Now, crucial for conflict management in these traditions is the principle of intergenerational mutual responsibility. It is not just a notion of ordinary practice of citizenship, but one that invokes the ancestral tradition and a cosmological dimension which goes beyond the human, where to heal the earth is to heal the nation. The belief in ancestors is central to life as lived by most African people, even those today who, for various reasons, disavow the centrality of this belief, have not been able to exist outside its metaphysical ramifications because of the communitarian nature and structure of African societies. We will always have ancestors who have bequeathed to us a legacy that we can and should tap into because it is a moral legacy, a system of ideas on how to live life. Now, speaking of living life, for traditional Africa, life does not just mean the biological opposite of death. And so to speak of living life is to speak of community, well-being, good health, prosperity, security, peace, and happiness. Now, these ontologies of being help to situate the human being in the stream of life in which the community is central. Some of the violent conflicts in Africa stem from ontological connections to territory, as different communities fight to assert and defend their forms of existence in the face of government-initiated programs and other forms of neocolonial resource extraction and green grabbing in the context of climate change. Now, cases of forced removal of rural communities, such as pastoralists from their land, in the name of promoting sustainable development, are becoming another cause of conflict. The point I'm making is that philosophical knowledge of traditions and of the ontological connections to territory and place should allow us to anticipate some of these conflicts and therefore avert them before they break out. Injustice. Again, philosophical standpoint, justice is the necessary condition for lasting peace anywhere, including in the family. So there is a simple truism that there is no peace in the world because there is no justice. Structures and institutions that entrench injustice create conditions for instability and conflict. When political regimes in Africa are perceived as accomplices and corrupt enablers of global injustice and of perpetuating historical injustice, uprisings, bandit groups, and militias are formed, and often with the support of grassroots people to stop the injustice. So issues of justice, therefore, perceived or real, are at the core of most conflicts in Africa. In my own language, in Shona. A shilling is bigger than any crime. Now, the colonial roots of that Shona saying is apparent because we didn't have a currency like shillings. And those who know it, it is a British origin. And the sagacity and contestations about justice cannot be missed in that saying. Now, many people in Africa still find the modern justice system rather alien and alienating, especially for those in rural areas where two justice systems still exist side by side, of course, with the foreign modern one superintending over the customary one. Modern justice can be draining in terms of not only time and money, but also emotionally, because of the problem of seeing the possibility of rebuilding human relations after the court process. It is too adversarial and rather cold. And it is perhaps one of the reasons why so many crimes committed between and among relatives go unreported, because the outcome can be damaging instead of restoring harmony and relations. Now, this just system can be the incubator of conflict within and between communities. The aggrieved often ends up with no other recourse except to mobilize and embark on acts of banditry and confrontation. Now, instead of the emphasis on justice being about reaching consensus and restoring relations, the concern seems to be on escaping punishment and punitive retribution, even through the use of sophistry. I think those who have done the history of philosophy will remember the work of the sophists and how they fell out of favor in the Greek community because of this practice. Mosa aiori, a crime does not petrify or decompose. Now, Ubuntu Justice rejects the politics of amnesia, although it remains amenable to closure if the perpetrator takes full responsibility and honors the debt in a manner that allows for closure. It does not condone superficial settlements where the perpetrators of injustice and usurpation everywhere are left to pursue privileged existence, secure in the spoils of their sordid history, in the words of Soyinka, and unmoved by the plight of their victims. Now, this is one way to explain some of the most old and intractable conflicts that seem to die down and then erupt without notice now and again. If left unresolved, disputes over resources such as land in some parts of Africa can become a major source of conflict. The role of philosophy is to articulate the different conceptions and metaphysical basis of justice and of living together, and that includes paying attention to the problems of a certain and dominant conceptualization of justice as it is applied in the communities. Point. I hope I'm still within time. Yes. I entitled the fourth point, Ubuntu and the Rehumanizing Mission in African Philosophy. I think you made reference that I will speak about women. Your prophecies come true. Now, violent conflict is not a creation of nature, beings, and so it is not eternal. I always believe that something that is put in place by human beings can be reversed. Only gods have the prerogative to give something that lives to eternity. Thinking sets the agenda for action. And the thinking of humans as less than human paves the way for atrocity. Now, the systematic dehumanization of fellow humans is perhaps one of the strongest driving forces behind atrocities throughout history, including what we continue to witness today. So dehumanization unleashes aggression. So with the loss of humanity and with this inferior ontological standing, human beings can now be handed down like animals. And therefore creates what Dasta calls conditions for guilt-free massacre and moral disengagement. Now, confronting its dynamics ought to be among some of our most pressing priorities as scholars and intellectuals, and in this case, philosophers. It is here where recourse to traditions of humanness and their articulation becomes paramount. A philosophy that speaks to this problem and which challenges this at its core helps to expose the practice and to challenge the theoretical framework that sustains this practice. So as both philosophy and political ethical framework, Ubuntu is a tradition of thought whose provenance lies in the subterranean depths of indigenous African cultures, but it lends itself to the demands to illuminate thinking on issues that affect our world. Its distinctive relational orientation is rooted in the belief in the ontological oneness of humanity. So by taking both the totality of existence and the mystery of being as point of departure, it is a tradition of thought which compels us to re-examine our relations, not only as humans, but towards the world in which we live together. The question that some may have is, with this philosophy and its promise, why are conflicts still prevalent? Does this not invalidate its credentials? The answers can be varied. But the point I wish to make is that you do not abandon religion because more people are sinning. Instead, you double down. And secondly, perhaps without Ubuntu, it is possible that these conflicts could have been far much worse than what they are today. So African philosophical efforts to articulate the various indigenous philosophies of humanness inherent in the cultures of its people can be one of its most important contributions towards peace and conflict resolution. And here the entire point behind this is that Ubuntu and the rehumanizing quest is the desire to build a more human world. And as we read, it reminds us, it would profit us little to gain all the technology in the world and lose the humanist essence of our culture. My final point is entitled Transformative Engagements. The colonial relationship which binds Africa to the West in a very special way has also created compartmentalizations on the continent at many levels, which call for social and intellectual boundary crossing in order to maintain relations, even at the level of ideas. So the internalities of Africa demand the continuous strengthening of an intercultural philosophical practice, even within the continent itself. And the roots of that nourish that philosophy are located in the traditions of dialogue. So dialogue must assist us in addressing the many complex issues that define our continent, even as we continue to borrow valid ideas from other cultures. Transformative thinking looks to the future. In this ceaseless struggle between life and death, the resources inherent in our cultures, which are a culmination of years of living together, must provide solutions to our problems, including the challenge of conflicts. And then the conclusion in a sentence. So there are priority issues that impose themselves on the philosophical practice in Africa. And these deserve our attention. And one of those issues is the issues of conflict. Ultimately, what we can achieve with this intellectual heritage, which is African philosophy, is only limited by our capacities to imagine what is possible. There are resources inherent in every culture to guarantee community, relationality, justice, and to advance the quest for building a more humane world. All that is needed is to heed the Shona saying, Chengawosi, Mananga Panashnamonzi. There are sources of validity in every culture, no matter how different in outlook. I thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. You can sit here. I know you don't want to be elevated above the rest of the panel, but this is what we have for you. Thank you so much. I think I need a long weekend off to digest this a little bit, but unfortunately, we have a debate to do still. Thank you so much. I like how practical this is. It's not philosophy and talking a little bit, but you see that in mind I have some of the conflicts in Africa and elsewhere, and I see how this can resonate as well. Thank you so much. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do the debate part, and you see on the screen there's 3 rounds, and we're gonna do it like this. First, there's a statement. One of the panelists is gonna reflect on it shortly, and then the debate will be held between the panelists. Unfortunately, it's not gonna debate with all of us like in England or with us in the second chamber. It's gonna be a debate between them, but luckily you have the option to ask questions. You will, by the way, have an option to ask a question to the professor just now. Because maybe you're thinking like, what am I doing here? Why am I here? Well, you're here to win the Africast mug. That's why you're here. And there's one way to win it, and that is to ask the best question. And the best question is not, it doesn't begin with Wittgenstein 2, and if you combine it with Yoruba culture, blah, blah, and you do a whole new keynote, that's not a good question. The question is short and directed at one of the 4 people. I advise you to direct at one of the 4 people. I'm the only not doctor here on the make-believe stage. So short and specific, please. And then you have these cards, and you can either agree or disagree. If you want to make it extra nice for yourself, you can write down if you agree or disagree when you just read the statement, and afterwards maybe you switch and you switch and you agree, and then later you disagree, or vice versa. And when I was listening to you, Professor, I feel there's something of a reconciler in you. And when I read your book before, at least the conclusions, of course, I feel that there's something soothing about how you talk and what you say. So maybe you can reflect on every statement shortly as well, if you don't mind. All right. So let's practice a little bit. Is there anyone who has a mug-worthy question for the professor before we enter the debate? Is there somebody? Yeah? Is there a microphone for her? Panik is not prepared for this round of questions.
Who was? Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I'm not a philosopher. I'm also not a doctor. I come from the business, so very pragmatic, but I have in my heart a lot the passion for peace and security. So how we can integrate philosophy to concrete, give support to the civil society, but also the civil military and all multilateral stakeholders that are the main player for peace and security with concrete action. Because what I hear is indeed what is really the main problem and also the main solution, but I still don't see how we want to make it happen, because the war is here. It is since long in Africa, but now it's coming closer. So how we can use and orchestrate, I think a philosophy is really the tool to orchestrate all the other operational body. Thank you.
Do you want to answer, Professor? Do you have a microphone, or is it gone? Oh, that's the microphone.
All right, thank you for the question. And in philosophy, introduction to philosophy, we have philosophy of language. And in there you'll find complex questions, questions for which no answers can be provided. And we always try to provide answers, but they will always remain unsatisfactory. That's what makes the questions very complex. So it depends with the perspective. If you want us to provide solutions that should work now, our point as philosophers is that, as I said, conflict begins with human beings in the mind and how they conceptualize the world around them. And it is when we challenge human beings at that level that I think we can make a huge difference. Instead of going into the field just to stop wars, it's for others to do that. But if we can convince the young who get recruited into this at the level of ideas and theory, then we would have made a huge and significant difference. Even the UNESCO mission tells you about the role of philosophy in shaping minds for a better society. So that's where we are. And I think I have articulated a number of things within the 20 minutes provided that I think philosophers can champion.
Thank you. We'll leave it with one question because I'm too curious to dive into the debate. But let me first introduce the three people shortly who are sitting on my left side, at your right side. So we have three doctors. Dr. Irma Specht. I'm super happy that you're here because you were unlucky with your car, but you're here. She was running in, sweating, trembling, but now she's super relaxed. So super welcome to you. The other lady in red sitting in the center is Dr. Roothaan. Thank you so much for being here. There's some additional information on the slide when you react to the statement. And there's Dr. Kegel. I thought it would be Kegel, but it's Kegel. It's a Dutch name. And the English name is Burton, right? So half Dutch, half English. We have people all around the world. Super cool. Let's start it up with this first statement. So that is for Dr. Specht. And the statement is, relying too heavily on international peace models has failed Africa. We, maybe that's the world society or Africans, need to build a safe future by reclaiming own traditions. Can you give your first reactions, please? Maybe you can use one of the microphones provided. Maybe for online, it's nice.
For the online, maybe, yes. Yes, I largely agree with the statement, and I will come to that in the conclusion. I have one, and if time allows, two examples to illustrate. I've been doing a lot of research in different countries in Africa, and one of them is South Sudan. And I would like to take you to the White Army. Now, what is the White Army? The White Army is, in fact, a cultural institution of young people joining the cattle camps after initiation. And they go there, the boys and the girls, and they live there together and become young adults. And their roles is to protect the cattle, to get more cattle, so raiding, but also if there's external threats to the community, to defend the community. So White Armies is a better word because every basically community or region has one. Now in 2015, the UN Secretary General released a report on children in armed groups, children and armed conflict in South Sudan. And there is lists of armed groups that recruit children. So there, the White Army was listed as an armed group, and it was listed to having children, use children and have recruited children. And according to the international model of child protection and child disarmament, demobilization and reintegration, DDR, these children should immediately be removed. Now, I think it illustrates two problems arise. First of all, I don't think the White Army is necessarily best defined as an armed group, but more as a cultural institution. And indeed, because of the conflict in the region, many of these young people do get armed, including Kalashnikovs, because also they need this to protect the cattle and to get more cattle, because the other groups also have it. So an armed cultural institution, does that become automatically an armed group? I don't think so by international definitions. The bigger problem is that it's the notion of children. Now, of course, all African countries, including South Sudan, recognize that under 18 is a child, but culturally, I think that can be heavily challenged in many cultures within Africa. The children are not recruited; they are initiated and then become part of the White Army. According to this is within Nuer tradition. So, according to the Nuer, as soon as you're initiated, you are an adult, which means you have responsibilities, you can marry, etc. Well, Professor, I think in Zimbabwe, we have seen similar things, similar ideas. So the problem there is also, if you would go then in and demobilize the children out of the White Army, that would have been the end of the White Army. And then who would protect the communities? So that's, I think, the most important example. Do I have time for another one or not?
Yeah, a short one. Yeah, we don't have the time, but I'm so curious. We have to.
Okay, all right. Okay, then I take you to Congo, DRC, where I did a lot of research lately. And the basic idea, again, in this, sorry, I talk a lot. I mean, my main research is among young people that are part of armed groups for the last 25 years. So I talk about that mainly. So the main idea in terms of peace building internationally is that you have to disarm, demobilize, and reintegrate the people who were fighting. That's a very, DDR is regarded as a very important step. What comes with that is you have to break the command structure between the commander and the younger people fighting under them, as that's the model. A precondition for peace. Now, this does not take into account the constructed kinship relations created within the subcultures of the armed groups, which are often there to stay, and for many young ex-combatants, their only safety net after they leave. So in my research in DRC over the past years, I've done interviews with 5,000 young people in armed groups or who just left. More than 20% are still, so they went back to the community. So in the international peace model, you only have either you're associated, either you're in or you're out, you're reintegrated. But many of them, about 20%, are back home. They live in the communities, they go to school, they have jobs, etc. But 20% of them still performs a regular task for the armed group. For example, if weapons come in, spying, etc. So this dichotomy between in or out, in fact, in the realities on the ground, doesn't really
exist. So the in or out is like the international peace model, and that doesn't work for these conflicts.
It doesn't reflect the reality.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, that was it.
Thank you. So that is I agree. Right?
Yeah, okay, maybe. Okay, in conclusion then, yes to the first part of the statement, but the international models fail most specific contexts within, but also outside of Africa, as they are too generic. So I think any international peace building model, because it also didn't work in Nepal.
So yeah? What do we need? Do we need an African peace model?
So, and I worked a lot with the African Union in helping to develop models for Africa. But there again, the differences within Africa, there's a lot of similarities, but the differences are also so big that any of these big overarching models might not really work unless it's context driven.
Clear. Thank you. And I like the little music you make with your hands, so you sort of understate your statement. Is there one of the other three who wants to react on this?
I think you first, because it's about conflict.
Oh, we're not doing this. You first. You take the mic and you're going for it.
All right. Thank you so much. Now, I think I quite disagree with the statement because
All of it.
Most of it. I think a big problem which is in it is that, and I'm a historian, so you'll have to forgive me for my disciplinary bias, but the idea that if we reach back to something in the past, it'll make today better. That is not the case. The past is also a violent place, right? It's not as if we are now living in a time with this great violence and there was not violence before. And I think that's also the case for Africa. Even if you go all the way back to the pre-colonial, there are societies which have a big emphasis on warrior culture and on fighting as an important part of their life, just as anywhere else in the world. So I'm always very unsure about these ideas where if we reach back into the past, it might somehow make the future better, even though the past is not a very nice place either.
So who's reaching back to the past then? The international model or?
Well, we apparently, according to the statement, we need to reach back in the past, right? By reclaiming traditions. And I don't think we should.
Dr. Roothaan.
It's a dangerous route to go down.
Yeah.
Can I follow up on this? I think the last point you made is actually the point that the philosopher would focus on when they done some post-colonial and decolonial studies. Ask, who is we? Because we is a very dangerous word. You can use it, of course, in writing and in speaking to create a kind of sense of community with your audience. And that may be good because we have to get somewhere. But especially
stay close to your microphone.
Especially in situations where you have a heavy inheritance still of very violent and oppressive past of the colonial situation in this case. It's very important to specify who is the we. And who made these questions?
Let's say we is everybody in this room. How would you then react to the statement?
I would have more problems even, because what could I say about specific situations that you mean in specific cultures where I've never been with certain historical contexts, etc., certain ways to divide tasks between genders or between age groups that I don't know of. So in that sense, I would not count myself to the we at all and would rather say nothing. What I think I would like to do is to more or less follow you in the sense of every reflection on these matters should be very grounded historically, socially, and also the ownership of this reflection is always to be grounded.
Also in the field, and that's where you're good at.
Yeah, and I also have a problem with the word field.
All right.
Because it can be a big city. There's no grass to find.
Yeah, I live in the field. I live in south of Limburg, so we're very much in the field.
It's not so much what I meant with field.
I know.
Some last words before we go to the questions of the audience or online. So if you have a question,
or
you are
I think
online,
Professor also wanted to say something, but can he? But anyway, just very quick. I think for the we. And I went to him like I don't like my statement because of the we, and he said, well, don't start a debate about the statement. So I didn't, but then thank you for bringing it up. I think the we here is not referring to this room. The we is Africans. And that's why I was uncomfortable getting the questions, because then I should have been an African. I'm a lot within the only white in big discussions among African scholars or policymakers, and in the African Union, and then they speak about we, and it's we Africa. So I think this meant, according to me, we Africa.
There's only a tiny pool in between Africa and Europe.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So let's leave it there, the we. But the ownership there is that's the whole point. But also, and I think there's a reserve question. I don't know if you're going to get to that on who is we in Africa in terms of ownership. Is it the conflict? Is the ownership local, or is it national elites with their own realities and views? So that's the follow-up question. But anyway, just you, because we're supposed to debate, and nice that you disagree with me, because otherwise we can't debate. I don't think past is the same as tradition. And I would like to pass the floor to the professor to see if that makes sense. So what I heard is that because traditions are not past, they're not static, there's not no change, but without embedding peace building and models in tradition and reflecting some of the values and norms that come from these traditions, I think then people get pretty much lost. One of the things I didn't say is I think that the second part of the statement, I think it's very important. I don't think I read this. It's very important that African notions would actually make it into these international peace building models, which I don't think they are enough. And referring quickly to Professor Ter Haar in her chair in the ISS, looking at human rights and international instruments, and how if are they not slightly Western, or, well, I'm not doing justice to you, but how neutral are they, or how inclusive are they?
Here's the microphone. Yeah, please, Mr. Mungwini.
No, thank you so much. I think I agree mostly with your presentation. And part of the reason is it brings out clearly the problem with universal prescriptions that do not take context into consideration. Because the White Army, I suppose the name white comes from the resource they are looking after, which is milk, to nourish their communities. And that's why they are called the White Army. If the White Army was removed and replaced by a more value-neutral term, I think even the outside world would have understood it. It is a translation from one language to the other. I don't think the Dinka, if we took their own terms, it would translate exactly as an army or a brigade that we will have when we use these concepts. And I think within African philosophy, it is what we always call upon when we emphasize conceptual decolonization, because many misunderstanding begins at the level of concepts, because it is through concept that we communicate meaning. Now here, a very clear example of a white army misconstrued as a fighting army that must be banned completely. And yet it is a tradition with a long practice, and which needs to be protected and only probably modified so that it does not meddle into other conflictual issues, but it remains to play a valid role in the community. Then coming to the term tradition, I heard, of course, this usual, I don't know, we encounter this so much that there is no past to return to. Now, what is called tradition, by definition, is something that is handed on to others. It is that handing over, the continuous handing over, that makes a tradition. So without the handing over, there is no tradition. So by virtue of speaking about a tradition, we are acknowledging that this is something that has been modified, handed over because of its validity and value. So that one is not an issue for me. It is when we say we want to return to the past, it's not a literal return, because we can never return in it. It is simply a reminder to look into the resources that are still available, but which are being overlooked because of their provenance. They originate in certain cultures. Let's look through, because of our experience between modernity and the tradition. And that's what I can say about this return. It's not a literal. Every scholar would understand that it's a pragmatic return in terms of sifting through what works. And because it is part of tradition, and the etymology of tradition tells us that. Then the we, yes,
As a philosopher, you must
yeah,
like that term.
The we, I did not even problematize it, because if I problematize the we at this point, we will not be able to speak, to communicate, because every term we can begin to go on it and it will produce several other implications. And those who know the history of philosophy would know very well that this kind of conceptual hygiene has not yielded much in a certain tradition of philosophy. And then this is the reason why others will say, no, you are not practicing philosophy. You are simply playing with words. Right? And so I think in an issue which is so serious as conflict, it's the we, is those of us who are concerned about the situation in Africa. And specifically, not only Africans, but the people who are concerned about the situation of conflict. If we can return to the ideas, like the researchers have just found out, then there is something that you can find from those ideas.
All right, there's somebody online who's not able to win the mug, of course, but it's also not a question. But it's nice because this person also is from the University of Zimbabwe, and he thinks that for any peace model to work, it has to be rooted in the culture of the people among which it is supposed to work for. The model has to be developed together with the people involved, making use of their knowledge, systems, and values, so that a sense of ownership develops among these people. I think that that concludes it. Super nice. We go to the questions here as well. So if there's any, I see some hands. Sprint for it, Fenneke. Sure, please.
My question is to Professor Mungwini. My name is Doreen van Noren. I did a study also on Ubuntu, and I would like to know whether you think that the African Union is using Ubuntu or similar practices for restorative justice sufficiently in conflicts in Africa, and to what extent the African Union may clash also with, for example, the European Union on approaches, especially sending people to the International Criminal Court versus finding a local restorative justice solution.
Oh, yes, a mock contender. Professor Mungwini, please. Yeah.
Thank you for the question. I think from your research, I think you already know that not many, not many are utilizing the resources that are available in that culture to the optimum because of this belief that the solutions are already found. So there is what we have always identified as some kind of moral, we call it moral imperialism, for lack of a better term. The consultants on these issues are usually scholars and not the sages of the societies involved. And if you come to me, the knowledge I have perhaps is more from the books than from the community. But if you were to ask me, I can refer to certain individuals within communities that are well versed in the traditions, who are old and perhaps not interested in all these sophisticated issues, but will be able to advise people on how to move forward. So the main problem is we have not been using the resources of Ubuntu properly, because wisdom goes with the age in those people who lead the community, who know the history and traditions, and who can appeal to the so-called other world, the ancestral world, in resolving conflict. But we don't use them. Instead, we look for experts. So we are not utilizing that.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the what you think, online and offline. Show me your cards. Read the statement, and what do you think? Do you agree or do you disagree? There's no point in agreeing on half of it. You have to agree with all of it. Do you have cards? Yeah? Okay, here I see a lot of green, some red. Oh, it's a little bit divided. So it is a good statement then. And what is happening online, Paula? Are people sending hearts to one or the other? Okay. Oh, there's many more online. So you can give your reaction later. Let's go to the second statement. And the second statement is for Mr. John Kegel. Conflicts on the African continent have become more complex, which makes conventional resolution mechanisms obsolete. Please.
All right, thank you. So let me, from the start, say that I disagree with this statement. I believe that if you look at the history of humanity, there are some basic causes or drivers for conflict. Faith is an example, right? Religion, ideology, socio-economic factors, how is wealth divided among a community, local versus regional power interests, right? Who is your boss, so to say, or who determines what you can do and what you can't do? Do you agree with that dispensation, yes or no? The will of the elites, right? Certain elite actors searching for glory or other reasons like that. And then, of course, some states have geopolitical interests. And I believe these have been the case for all of humanity. And I don't see that an additional factor has suddenly appeared which would make warfare in Africa more complex. I'll just take a couple of historical examples to show that war has been very complex in the past as well.
Very short.
Very short.
Yeah.
Okay, so Europe between 1618 and 1648, right? The 30 Years' War.
Not a straightforward war. No.
Exactly. Generally speaking, we say it's a religious conflict, but actually there's much more going on. You have the relationship between the princes of the Holy Roman Emperor and the emperor. What's the power relation between them? International actors are going after their own interests. France, Sweden, Denmark, they all get involved. If you look more recently in European history, you see almost exactly the same dynamics, for example, in Yugoslavia. If we now transfer the case to Africa, and of course, we're a little bit on thinner ice because our historical sources are not as good. But if anyone wants to have a look at a really complicated conflict, look at the civil wars of the Nyingenya kingdom, right? Ancient Rwanda, pre-colonial Rwanda. They are incredibly complex and have to do with caste, with different groupings vying for the throne. Similarly, the same could be said for the Fulani Jihad. Yes, you have an obvious sort of religious aspect, but there's much more going on. The suppression by the Hausa aristocracy of, let's say, the peasantry was another key driver of that conflict. More recently in African history, two very long conflicts, the struggle against apartheid, which lasted almost 50 years, and the War of Independence of Angola, which then led into the Civil War. These are extremely complicated conflicts. And I don't see what has changed between that time and now, which justifies us saying that war in Africa has become more complex. So that's my main point. As to the second point, are conventional resolution mechanisms obsolete? I think that it depends on how you define it, of course. But for a peace process to work, I think you need both a formal aspect, and I think the peace process in South Africa is a very good example, right? Of course, you need the armed groups speaking to each other, you need bilateral negotiations, you need judicial change. But on the other hand, you, of course, need grassroots engagement, right? Interfaith dialogue, business communities supporting the peace initiative. So I think that with the tools which we see, let's say, already in the 1990s, I think they are more than sufficient to solve most conflicts. But the problem is, of course, conflicts only end when the participants don't want to fight anymore.
Is something overlooked, ladies? Does Dr. Kegel see something that you do see?
There were some very interesting historical examples. I'm not a historian, so I learned something. Thank you. I would gladly follow a course of 12 sessions from you, in which you treat of historical wars all over the globe. Yeah, but I didn't see anything omitted.
As we are not here to criticize whoever made those statements, I still wonder, what is conventional resolution mechanism? So it's not traditional, no? Conventional, is it standardized, or I don't really understand where it refers to, but in general, just to respond to you, I do think that the nature of conflict has changed quite a bit and might require in some fields different approaches. Let me just take you to my field again, the combatants. Historian as well, but so I can only look back, maybe thinking about 50 years or something, or this whole idea of this disarmament, demobilization, reintegration programs. If you look at Mozambique, etc., it was quite clear who was the government soldiers, who were the rebels. There were lists, there were names, etc. If I take you to Congo now, it is completely so difficult to know who is fighting who. People are part-time. In Congo Brazzaville, where I was, I found out that university students were fighting only in the weekend, and there was peaks of violence in summer holidays, and for the rest they were the elite, the future elites. And so I do think that became more complex in some countries. And I think the other one that does require a real difference that we haven't really, well, there's some studies on it, but I don't think, and we don't know half of it yet, or 10%, is the whole online, and I'm also looking at our moderator, all these people that are involved in conflict are all on their phone.
So why exactly are you looking at the moderator when you think of online violence?
Well, no, just online in general, you know?
Oh.
Yeah,
I'm online, that's true.
Yeah, exactly. No, but I mean, I see it. Young people get influenced online. They get mobilized online. They get radicalized online. They get new ideas online. They compare what they have compared to others. So the whole aspirational culture of young people and realization what they don't have is higher. But also armed groups. I've seen. Sorry, taking you out of Africa, but I've seen in Jordan there was, I don't know if you know the video game Call of Duty, but there's a new video game Call of Duty made by ISIS, where you kill a Christian, you get 100 points, and this and this and this, and you know. So I mean, I think we're just starting to understand what this means, and I think it will require other tools.
Yeah. Let's go back to Africa. Does anybody have a question on this statement? And I apologize for the online people who can't see the panel. It's supposed to track you, but good that you're still here. Yeah, a question there, Fenneke, behind you.
Thank you very much. Please, I would like to ask any member of the panel, did the global age of discovery and its economic consequences not complicate the nature of global conflict? Thank you.
Dr. Kegel? Yeah, you can repeat the question and answer, please, John.
So, Uche, if I get your question right, you're saying the sort of age of exploration, so the European, let's say, expansion over the world, did that not create new dimensions in warfare? Or did it not make warfare more complicated? All right. Well, essentially, no, I don't think so. Sure, you have different people fighting each other, but I don't see the difference between Europeans arriving in Africa and meddling in politics there, with, let's say, Mongols expanding to the Middle East or to Turkey or to Europe and meddling there, right? Again, the drivers of conflict, the conflicts individually are totally different, but the drivers, greed, expansionism, they are, I'm afraid, and I agree with, or maybe disagree with the professor, that they're in us as humans. And so we are the cause of those conflicts, and our spread or reach over the world doesn't change that. I hope we can get rid of it. I think I'm less sure than the professor that we shall.
So it just depends on the perspective. You look from a theoretical model about human nature, and inclinations, and you look always from concrete examples and how they are culturally and socially formed. So then you see the difference. In your case, you see the, yeah, so maybe I'm a peacemaker between you, or bring out a
Oh, we have another
more.
reconciler. That's great. Is there another question in the room? Yeah. Keep it short, please.
Yes. There are very heavy climate changes the last time, and that has a very, very much consequences for the theme at the debate now. Please, can you give attention to that?
Yeah, Dr. Specht?
Since I have the label of the examples, I will give you an example of it. And thank you for bringing it up because it's huge indeed. I just did some research on the borders between Mauritania and Mali, where you have indeed a situation of drought and conflict overlapping. And Malinese cattle herders would come in the thousands with their cattle always to Mauritania. Mauritanians are known as very hospitable people, very nice people. But these days, as the wells are drying up and there's not enough water, this becomes less and less, you know, the tolerance of, in French, I call this report le réfugié à quatre pattes. So refugees on four legs, because they come there and they stay. Then if you look at this conventional conflict resolution mechanism, what the international community is tending to do then is to support these refugees who are there at the expense of the Mauritanians who are hosting them. And that itself creates massive conflicts. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, can I see the cards? Going back to the statement, do you agree or disagree? And please do see this statement and the little, we are touching some things, of course. Please go to the drinks later to discuss even more between each other or with the panelists. Can I see your cards? Oh, wow, it's pretty 50-50, right? Okay. How is that online, Paula? More agree, all right. Do you want to say is there need for reconciliation now? Was it the debate too hot, maybe?
Yeah, perhaps what I could say is to read the meaning of the statement itself and what it implies. When I read conflicts on the African continent will become more complex. What it simply means is the things that fuel conflict have become much, much more than simple things over fighting over an item or two. In other words, the drivers of conflict have become too difficult to understand in a simplistic manner. That's what that statement meant. And then if you look at this in the nature of the world that we live in, we've just been given a very good example of how the modern communication tools that we have today have actually made conflict even much more complex. It can be driven by individuals that are not even in the space where the fighting is taking place, or who are unrelated to the issue, but fueling it. And that's how complex it has become. Now, to solve it, that kind of issue, it means the conventional ways of sitting down for arbitration and talking about this will not work because the debate is happening elsewhere as well. So you need to be able to take care of all these platforms. But the unfortunate thing is you have no control over the other platforms. You can only control what happens within your own local area. But these virtual platforms, where much of this happens and where it is fueled these days, are beyond our control. And that's where the complexity part of it comes from. And then, of course, the changes that are happening in our society. If you look at the climate change, now, those who have read about climate change would realize that it is compounding already existing problems. There are already challenges, but they are being compounded by climate change. Mm-hmm. And some of these add to our way of understanding how to deal with conflict because of what is happening. And finally.
So what do you mean with compound? It makes it even more explosive?
It adds on to.
Yeah, yeah.
Another layer,
Another layer.
yeah, of difficulties in dealing with this. And then I was going to make the point about, before you interrupted me, that, yes, there are competing interests, external influences, and other geopolitical factors which complicate matters. Or any clash between two communities in any part of Africa, you will be naive to think that there are no forces that are driving this behind. Now, if you dig deeper, you will realize that perhaps the fight here, which has its historical origin between the division of people into tribes because of our political history, has taken on another dimension, which you need to understand better in order to resolve it because of external interests. Some might be working to fight over a certain resource, which is required by some business entity somewhere. And so that entity is supplying money for illicit weapons and everything, and it's benefiting. And they seem to be running a clean business. And that's how complicated conflict can become. So it is not that people were not fighting before. They would fight, but you would know that they are fighting over grazing land, territory, or they don't just like each other because of the history. But now, if you take that simplistic view, then you'll have misunderstood what is happening on the ground. So as she says, understanding conflicts is actually, can become a lifelong a research endeavor because the causes keep moving. Once you think you've grasped this issue, you realize there is more to it than what I initially thought.
Thank you. Let's go to the third statement and last statement by Angela Roothaan. It is peace building that doesn't include African spiritual, communal, and oral traditions is ineffective.
Again, we didn't make these statements. And I have a bit of a problem with the statement, but that is, of course, the point, that we can be for or against them. But I would phrase the statements not in this way. And my problem is similar to the problem with the we. Who is the one or who are the ones saying this and why? So this is, of course, again, the philosopher speaking. Philosophers have this tendency to always make a step back or several step backs and look at the preconditions of a certain question or of a statement. Why is it said like this, etc. So on the surface, I would completely agree with the statement. And we've already heard that traditions is not the same as returning to the past. That was a very, very good clarification between John and Professor Mungwini. So, of course, every peace building in any conflict should include cultural traditions, spiritual, communal, oral traditions, if we speak about Africa. But the problem is that when we would be Westerners or white people who are saying peace building in Africa should include so and so and so, then we are again subject to what one could call or have what has been called the colonial gaze. So if, say, in the 18th century, different noble families in Germany were having a conflict over religion and there was fighting, etc., of course, their cultural traditions would play a role in peace building when the conflict was being brought to an end. So it is either a completely open door, or it is kind of making Africa and African problems and African solutions special. And it might, for white or Western or how we can call them people, bring bring this, no, not the non-Africans, because that's not the same. For me, what I call white is not necessarily your skin color, as black is also not necessarily your skin color, but it is belonging to a certain group in the world that has privilege and being comfortable in that situation. And that.
So it makes you a little bit awkward as well to make it so specific that these, for example, these oral traditions have to be included.
So it could be for white people, let me finish my sentence, be the trap that seduces them to exoticize or romanticize Africa and Africans. And that's, of course, goes against everything that I think all the experts here today are saying, that although certain specific African conflicts have bring along with them all these cultural, social, and local elements, but still that is not specific for Africa. That is always the case. And then I think something else is important more on a general level of this discussion, which I want to add to this, and especially to what was said in the last remarks of the last contribution of Professor Mungwini, is that when we look at conflicts, we can look to groups that are fighting, actual, like boys with guns or people with explosives or whatever. But that is not, of course, the only level that we should look at when we want to understand the conflict and look towards its solution. There are many questions around any conflict, and those habits are habitating the levels of power that are existing. Like you can look at who is fighting, who is bringing in the weapons, who is paying for the weapons, who is making the deals that the weapons can get there, who is facilitating this conflict, who is allowing this conflict. Those may be partners on a global scale and not on the ground. Who looks away? Who is being hurt by the conflict? So there's so many questions around it. And as a philosopher, I would always like to make things more complex and not more simple.
I'm standing here because I hope the video will draw the attention of the camera. We'll see. You disagree on anything, right?
Well, I don't necessarily disagree here, but I do think you have sort of led me to my comment, is that we have been talking about tradition and culture as possible moderators of conflict. But I think we should also understand that culture and, for example, the wise sages, which were mentioned, are in many cases also a driver of conflict, right? Yeah. When a society mobilizes for war, it is culture that is used to get people to actually go and fight. So not all traditions will help us solve the problems we have. In many cases, I think, traditions or even our culture is the thing which drives us towards conflict.
Yeah, so culture and tradition are not necessarily always good for conflict or a resolution.
Now, of course, as an anthropologist, I agree with this statement, but at the same time, I also am aware that I'm of and Gerry always reminds me of the horrible kind of history of anthropologists, exactly for the reasons that you're mentioning. So let me take the blame for my generations before me of scholars. I agree with this statement, having said that, but I also want to put a little comma. So again, examples. Yes, Congo, all these young people that are in the armed groups are initiated. The role of the ancestors, the invisible world. The invisible world is fighting with the fighters. They are mobilized. Who's mobilizing who is a big debate. Is it the young people mobilizing the invisible world to help, or is the invisible world actually the ancestors mobilizing those who are living now because they have the physical? So I see that in the DDR programs that I was talking about, the disarmament, demobilization, reintegration programs, this is not taken into account, because what I think you need to do is not just demobilize people by taking off their weapon and their uniform, but also they have received certain protections with charms, etc. These things still work today. And I've talked to many young people that say, yeah, we still keep it because you never know. They become like a reserve army. So they're not fully demobilized, and also done on purpose by a lot of these sages you're talking about, etc. So yes, you need to take this much better into account. However, there's one little point I want to make, and it was also earlier I wanted to say this, but maybe now, justice. Yes, but, and there I agree with you. Oh boy, we were opposing, but since it's the last one, let me come your way. Is that there are practices, cultural practices, although you can accuse me from cultural relativism, very much so. However, there are things, and I've seen things, that I would not like to leave the full justice to that customary situation, and especially when we're talking about gender and certain women rights. I mean, I've worked a lot in Sudan, and the conflicts around if women should be circumcised or not. No, you say FMG, I don't even know.
Female genital mutilation.
Yeah, exactly. So if you leave it to the sages, Papa, and if you leave it to the customary law, yeah, all the women are still cut today. So there's also a certain point by certain, and where is the border there, and what is, when, you know, and rape in Zimbabwe, in your country, where I've have the honor to do my research for my master, Professor, is that the dual system of justice is problematic, but in a way also, it was also, for example, if a woman is raped, she cannot be trialed by the customary courts, because they tend to be run by old men who might, you know, Papa's giving 2 goats and then we don't talk about it again. So yeah, there is a bit of a tension there as well for me.
Yeah.
And that goes, so I'm with you. Not all tradition is good. I'm with you. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to questions either from the audience or online. I see a lot of questions. Ooh. Fenneke, feel free.
Thank you very much. Jan van Butstra is my name, retired of this, retired of that, etc., etc.
Your question.
The question, talking about peace and justice, I remember a Kenyan Kiplagat who said, yes, of course, idealistically, peace only can be built on justice. At the same time, if we wait until we have justice, we never will have peace. Yeah. Wouldn't, and I'm grateful to our moderator, who brought in a third word in this question, and that is reconciliation. He said it 3 times or something. I think in this combination of peace and justice, shouldn't you bring in the word reconciliation and see what mechanisms in African culture are there available today that just bring about this reconciliation?
Yeah.
For until we wait until all justice is done and paid for, the world will no longer be there.
Yeah, I think it's a good moment to give the person who lives in South Africa the floor on reconciliation.
Yeah, perhaps very, very insightful. But then my conceptualization of what I have said, justice is not, it's a process, isn't it, to get there, as you rightfully point out. But in getting there, it's the process of getting there which people disagree with or agree to. And of course, we have models that have been used and that are recorded in books. But if you read closely, you will realize that the question of justice has remained a very thorny one, to the others disowning the entire process simply because they saw that according to indigenous understanding of justice, it was not followed because the source of injustice has remained. And yet you have forgiven, but then you begin to realize that there is no justice. So there are people who are contesting the models. And as I said, there is no perfect model because, yes, it's human beings who make these models, and all of us are not infallible. But it's a very, very, very important observation.
So you stick to no peace without justice. You don't go to no peace without reconciliation.
I stick to that formula in the manner I explained it. Because if you look at the causes of most conflict, there is a sense of injustice that drives this. There is a grievance, right? I don't know whether we should define the grievances and outline them, but one doesn't just wake up and start fighting. They feel they have been undone somehow, and they need to level it, the field. The field must be leveled. There is an unfairness somehow, and then conflicts do begin that way, most of them. Now, if we look at it closely, it means they revolve around issues of justice. But of course, we will never wait, as you say, until justice is restored. But we fight towards that end, that goal, which is justice. And hopefully, if justice was to be reached, perhaps societies would live harmoniously. But because it continues to be elusive and bringing new items in the process, and so conflicts can be prolonged. Yeah, but perhaps before I forget, I wanted to come back to this statement, the third statement, that this building that doesn't include African spiritual, communal, and oral traditions is ineffective. When I got this statement, I was so happy. It's a statement that did not come from philosophers. I suppose it came from people who work in the field, like anthropologists, historians, and everyone. And I could relate to what they meant. In other words, if you look at the history of conflicts within Africa and how they've been resolved, the example of Mozambique comes up. After years of fighting, it was the communities that found a way of rehabilitating fighters and those that have been affected through spiritual cleansing, a practice that we also witnessed. Although I was very young then with our liberation struggle, I remember very well people saying, he has just come from being a guerrilla. He cannot be a good member of society without being cleansed because of the spirits of what he witnessed, the death of so many people that he may have caused or seen without stopping. So they believe one has to be rehabilitated. And today, when within the modern Western world, you say post-stress traumatic disorder, you are speaking exactly to the same tradition that these cultures were already aware of. It's only that you have now coined it a more fancy name. But the reality is that there is more to a human being than simply his biological being. In other words, the emotional dimension has to be taken care of. Otherwise, after service, so many people find problems of living a normal life again. And psychologists have to come in to try and rehabilitate them. You ask yourself, what are they rehabilitating? They are rehabilitating the mind. Proper mind, a person cannot live properly with others within the society. And this is what the statement, how I interpreted this statement, when they said, yes, you can negotiate and have a settlement, sign an agreement, and end the war. And then elections must be held. And then there is a winner. And so the conflict is ended. Or you cede territory and then you end there. Now there is a peace. That's the modern one, right? But if you don't include and realize that the people who were fighting are indeed human beings who belong to societies, they still need to be accepted and to go back in the community. And they themselves have suffered a lot. And there are spiritual ways of cleansing them without even going to the clinics and hospitals. Otherwise, they don't work. if you look at most, that's why I said in my statement, because of the nature of our communitarian society, even those who believe they are now so modern and scientific have not been able to escape this world of tradition because it exists within the family. And so you remain isolated. And whatever you do, it means you still need to be rehabilitated to belong together with others. You do it not for yourself, but for the family. Because the spirits of the people you killed in defense of whatever aim follow you, but do not only affect you, they affect the entire family. And that's why it becomes an issue of the community.
Yeah, because you're always part of a network.
Yes, that's why I thought whoever came up with
maybe you think, how did you all wrote this down? But I'll give you a behind the scenes. It only says, yes, I agree.
Yes.
Last question on this part?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for this fruitful discussion and debate. My question is, shall we divide the conflict in Africa to the one is between tribes, and we, in this case, we can implement the traditional wisdom to solve the problem, and the other conflict is like the issue of state building. As you see in Sudan, there is a revolution group resistant. They demand for like social contract. So how we can find a African philosophy to deal with this two type of conflict? Or did you agree with my definition for the conflicts? Or so this question for the platform and from the debate.
Right. Since I've just spoken, I would give others the voice. But of course, you identify the two differences. But if I were to go back into the terminology of tribal wars, it is the name tribe itself, and the anthropologists would know how they have actually manufactured this whole thing, the ideology of tribalism and the effects. So we continue to use those terms, but I don't think we realize how much we continue to follow within the colonial narrative. But if we want to leave that, then perhaps we need to look at it much, much better and avoid that. But I understand your point. State building must have identity behind as well, isn't it? So it's much more complicated because the state on its own is nothing if there are no people, ethnic groups in that so-called state building. And then that's when the issues of power and who controls what becomes important. And in most cases, we find that the ethnicity of a leader or somebody matters more than the message they bring to the table when it comes to issues of politics. So you select somebody not because they have a very good mapping of how the country should move forward, but you ask yourself whether he also speaks on behalf of your community and where he comes from. The allegiance can be, where does this come from? That's why you find in modern Nigeria, they have a very good system where the president must either come from the north at one point serve and another from the south. I think it was a pragmatic way of dealing with the composition of society. It tells you something about how they set it down to try and make sure that this system will work for everybody because of the winner take all. That's why I made reference to the unanswered question in Africa.
I'm not sure if I directly will answer your question, but what it did make me think of is that when you talk about traditional ways or how tradition might help to solve conflicts, two examples, for example, are the Gacaca courts in Rwanda or the Mato Oput ceremony amongst the Acholi of northern Uganda. And a limit is that these traditions are accepted within one culture, but not necessarily between two different cultures. So I think that tradition is bound, if you wanted to help you solve conflict sort of on the micro level, it has to be accepted by all those who are involved in the conflict for it to be effective.
All right. Thank you. I'll leave it here if that's okay for you.
Can I add
Angela?
one more insight that I just...
With one sentence?
Maximum 3.
Maximum 2.
Okay. I found it very interesting how Professor Mungwini explained the idea of, or the praxis of spiritual healing. And then I thought, if I read my statements, my thesis, which I have to defend or reject, peace building that doesn't include African spiritual, communal, and oral traditions is ineffective, from another way, namely to say that any peace building all over the world should include African spiritual, communal, and oral traditions, then it will be a very good thing. But we should have to learn for a long time how to do it, because in our culture, this is not a standing practice. That was my...
Yeah, okay. I'm happy you pushed a little bit in order to say that. Thank you, Dr. Roothaan. Okay, I think we're going to some conclusions. Did we already vote? No. Oh. Who wants to vote? You really agree? Okay. Okay. And I think online is everybody agrees. So somebody disagrees. So that's nice. Maybe do you want to say something about it, or? Yeah. Yeah, Fanneke, do you have the really short, please? Yeah, there's somebody disagreeing. I'm curious.
I'm surprised I'm the only one, but I do think there should be a global peace building concept that everybody in the world adheres to. And yes, then on a micro level, you can have local practices in it. But I do think there should be a global watchdog that sets standards. Thanks.
Okay, revote, or are you? Okay. Let's end with some closing remarks by the professor. Maybe what you've learned. Yes.
Yeah, we have one more question because this person is so eager.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Curious.
My name is John.
Hello, John.
I am from Institute of Security and Global Affairs at Leiden University, their campus. My question is this: I quite agree with this statement, but my concern is this: how do we integrate these basic values in some conflicts that are transnational in nature? Thank you.
How do we integrate that? Everybody's looking to the floor somehow. It's too hard of a question, John. Dr. Kegel?
I'm being put on the spot, but no, it's exactly what I said. I think it's very, very difficult, right? If two communities don't accept the same cultural reference or framework, then how are you going to use cultural traditions or traditions which are based in culture to build peace? And I think that's one of the reasons why building lasting peace is so difficult. So that would be I don't have an answer for your question, I'm afraid.
Okay, let me play my role. I seriously disagree.
Ooh.
No, there is. Let's not make a mistake, because I mean I'm from Utrecht and I live in the south of Holland. Well, that's a culture shock, I'm telling you. And so, but it doesn't mean I cannot live with them in peace. But I do recognize their differences, and they recognize mine. So it's not, I don't think it's automatically that if you have different cultures and you bring them together or they come together, that it's because they don't have the same culture and tradition that automatically it's non-reconcilable. So I do think there is, and it's true that if it's neighboring countries, there's probably some cultural overlap. If it's like, you know, from the other side of the world, it becomes, as you, you can see, it
so
becomes
you inject a little bit of faith that people can listen to each other, get to know each other.
Celebrating diversity is also a big thing in Africa. Yeah, so yes.
Okay. Thank you. I want to go to the closing remarks of the Professor Mungwini. Maybe you can share some things that you've learned from the audience or from the panel. Yeah, 2 minutes.
All right, thank you so much. I think to provide a summary of the interesting issues that I've been following here, I could perhaps give the following statement, which I will take from one of our African philosophers, that two virtues are sought after here. One, to be particular enough to know ourselves, and two, to be universal enough to know others. And from the debate, if you have been following closely, it's not either or. From the questions that were provided or the guiding statements, it's not either or. But more often than not, in practice, we find people using either or. In other words, they want to negotiate a peace following what they believe are the universal standards. But they forget that conflicts happens in a specific area and context. And the so-called universal is also a particular that has been universalized. Now, if you forget that, there is nothing that is called universal on its own. It's an idea that has been given universal proclamation by a particular culture and a way of doing things. And it has gained prominence. But it shouldn't follow that then you disregard everything else because so many people agree that this model has worked, it worked somewhere, and so it must work. So the debate, if I follow closely, was against what I might call the imposition of templates. You bring a template to everything that you are dealing with, and hopefully hope that this must solve the problems. It never works that way. And template scholarship, we all know that. Once you mark an essay and provide a template, before you finish marking 4 essays, you will have realized that the template is not working. Yes. And so why does a template models work at the international level when they cannot work in a class of 5 or 10? The moment you begin to realize that the so-called international peace standards are a template organized by a group of people, they did not fall from heaven, and those people belong to a culture, and they have used the ideas using the experience of their context. And their hope is that because we are all human beings, it's going to work for everyone. Yes, we are human beings, but then we are manufactured slightly different because of the culture. So at the end of the day, I think the point I can take from these statements that were compiled, Professor, I don't know your team, but surely when I saw them, I realized they are so thought-provoking, and they emanate from people who actually have done a lot of research on conflict. And all I can say is, let's stick to the two virtues of the same coin. To be particular enough, not to forget Africa, right? And to be universal enough to be able to know what is happening outside. So the two will work together. And I hope from the White Army, you would see that the universal has not worked because it misconceived the White Army and its issues. But if they'd taken it, the particular, and combine it with the other, you would have realized it's not an army. It's actually a very good team that looks after the resource that is so important 3 4 minutes. I think 2 minutes is up. Right?
But I think it's yeah. I think it's great to be busy to talk with each other about justice, about virtues, and it gives me hope. So thank you so much. Also the closing remark. Maybe that's a good new underpinning of the African Study Center, Marlene. Just saying. Compliment to the organization. Thank you for being online with us. You're welcome to have drinks later and discuss or ask the questions that you weren't able to ask. I'm looking to Fenneke. I think there's 2 people deserve. Well, all of you deserve a mug, of course. There's 2 questions were very good. The Ubuntu lady here and John. What do you think? Have you ever been called the Ubuntu lady?
Well, I can't.
You can't? A hand for her. But more in general, I really appreciate your interaction with us. If you're curious what the Africast is, scan the QR and you'll find it, or go to Spotify or whatever and find the Africast. Maybe it's nice as a sort of a follow-up. But before I end this all, I want to give the floor to Akin Yinka. But there's, I mean, come to think of it, there's too much words already said. So maybe you can say it in a dance or in a see how you end.
Well, only 4 things to say in 1 minute. Thank you very much. Firstly, to the guys online, wherever you are in the world today, I know people talking from the United States, those from Cape Verde, texting, actually asking some questions. Thank you wherever you are in the world today. And secondly, thanks to the audience. Thanks for coming. Great to see nice faces once again and your contributions and the questions which you've asked. Fantastic. Thirdly, to the panelists, thank you very much. The struggle which you went through, if we describe what happened to the car today and where her car is right now, but I'm sure you'll be able to retrieve it and go home safely. So thank you. Prof. Mungwini, we have our own conversations, you know. We talked so much about Gachacha courts and the international courts yesterday and how certain things led to certain questions. Thank you so much. But philosophers, I learned something about philosophers this evening, which is a bit strange. Actually, when this topic came up, we thought, okay, yeah, we are going to have solutions to all the issues. But then she kindly offered that philosophers actually problematize things more than you ever think. So in order for us not to go home with still thinking of this problem, I would like to invite us downstairs to have some drinks, please. You can actually ask questions more, and then you can even go beyond the philosophers. You can see now that Africast also has a little bit of philosophy. So you can also ask him questions. Don't run away. So thank you very much. You are invited downstairs to the cafe to have some drinks and a little bit more chat with our players. Harry, lovely working with you. Thank you.